Hey, Kelvin. Great to have you in the class, man. And thanks for your work in week one. I know some of these readings are challenging, both in the ideas that they present and also just the complexity of what they're saying in English. So I appreciate you doing the hard work to try to make sense of what they're saying. And I look forward to this Friday when we're going to meet in person for the first time and we have a chance to maybe clarify some things when we can sit around a table and work through them together. So, thought I'd send you a reply video here in week one since we didn't get to see each other in person and tell you you've done great work in both forums. So, please rest assured that you're doing the right thing and your work is good and hope you can keep it up. I also want to give you a little bit of feedback on some of the specifics. I think, first of all, what you added to what Emily, when Emily asked you about Habakkuk specifically, and you elaborated a little bit, I thought that was great. That faith for Habakkuk has to mean something on the ground in circumstances that are psychologically and socially and politically devastating. His people have been invaded by the Chaldeans. The Chaldeans have unleashed a campaign of terror, rape, pillage on Habakkuk's generation, and he is complaining to God about what God is allowing to happen to God's own people. And that is the context in which the word of the Lord is that the just will live by faith. And what it means in that context is that the the just will not give in to ways of arrogance or pride or cynicism when everything seems to be falling apart. They will not resort to exploiting other people or manipulating them, taking advantage of their vulnerability, but instead they will trust God to provide. They will trust that it is worth obeying God's commands, loving God and loving neighbor, even when the circumstances are so terrible. And so that's the context in which faith has its meaning in Habakkuk that I think then Paul wants to build on in Romans. The audience of Romans is not experiencing oppression in quite the same degree, although they are living under a corrupt Roman imperial government, but they are facing temptations to treat one another pridefully, hypocritically, judgmentally, self righteously. And Paul responds to that tendency by saying that the gospel is about faith. It's about trusting God to be the judge, trusting God to provide, rather than taking advantage of one another in order to try to be the judge or ruler of each other. So hopefully that helps kind of make that connection between Habakkuk and Romans, especially on this term faith. And then I appreciate you engaging critically the challenging writings that I had you read for the second forum, which emphasize certain kinds of sort of political edge to Paul's gospel. And I hope that you will be able to see that this does not make the gospel any less psychological or the issues that Paul is addressing less psychological. As we're going to see in the letter, there is a tight correlation between the psychological and the political or the social. The way that people treat one another is also manifest in their inner life, the inner life of each person. And that is how Paul addresses the audience. So I tend to agree with you and Talbus that Paul is treading lightly. He is being careful, even though the letter proves to make strong claims, to be a forceful letter. It's presented respectfully, giving the audience the benefit of the doubt, repeatedly telling them. Paul says at the very end that Paul trusts that he's mostly told them things that they already know. So that's kind of Paul's rhetorical approach in this particular letter. And as Jay says, it is a letter that deals somewhat systematically, you might say, with certain key theological concepts and terms. Uh, but I also want to emphasize that it remains a letter addressed to the pastoral needs of a local community. And sometimes that has been neglected in the Christian reception of the letter. We have read the letter as if, the most important thing is what's in the first 8 chapters, with all of this kind of big general theology about sin and salvation and justification and grace, and thought that we could understand those things independently of all of the concrete pastoral challenges that Paul addresses starting in chapter 9. And I just think that that's wrong. Instead, I think we need to see that from the very beginning of the letter, Paul's exposition of these key theological concepts, salvation, sin, judgment, justice, grace, faith, is oriented toward the pastoral difficulties that are in the concrete situation of the people that he is writing to. So we want to be anticipating where the letter is going with how we make sense of its opening stages. I hope that's helpful to you. And like I said, when we meet together, we'll be able to talk about some of these things more. I think that the questions that you're going to have as a psychologist, especially with the dynamic that there is between the inner life of faith and the life of faith of treating one another hospitably, generously, non judgmentally, is going to be a crucial kind of focus, maybe for you in Romans, given your training to be a psychologist. So, thanks again, Kelvin, for some thoughtful responses and for working so hard with what I know is some difficult material. And look forward to more conversation ahead. Welcome again to the course.